Welcome to the Ask the DM seminar panel. Ow! How many of you are in a D&D game? Woo! Look at that. Awesome.
Oh yeah, I didn't raise my hand.
Yeah. A good part of this seminar will be dedicated to Q&A, but we want to kick off things by introducing ourselves and starting a few questions to get the ball rolling. And each of us dreamt of a question before we came here that we could ask one another. My name is Chris Perkins. I am the senior producer for Dungeons & Dragons at Wizards of the Coast. Thank you. My DM cred comes from years of campaigning. The two campaigns I'm running right now are 4th edition campaigns set in my own campaign world. I talk about it a lot on the D&D website in a column called The Dungeon Master Experience. You may also know me as the Dungeon Master for Acquisitions Incorporated.
And he's my DM.
Yes.
And mine.
And his. And we'll be doing our annual live game tomorrow at 3:30 in the Paramount. It's going to be awesome. The gentleman next to me is...
I'm Mike Merles. I'm the senior manager for D&D.
How many players have you killed over the years?
Oh,
I mean,
hundreds.
sorry, not players.
Players. Actually, there's I have a few aliases I've gone
That's
through.
why Mike's not in a game right now.
No, right.
Yeah, exactly.
All his players
They're
are dead.
Very
Yeah, they're
high
all in his
fidelity.
basement.
It's actually because, no, to be honest, it's because I DM at homes for the elderly, people at the end stages of their lives, so.
Yeah.
Too soon.
Mike, I love that you're such a dyed-in-the-wool DM that you are drawing a dungeon right now on that piece of paper.
I had a few minutes to kill, yeah. So I just kind of did some graph paper, just kind of hacked it together.
Yeah.
On my other side is...
I'm Jeremy Crawford. I oversee development and editing for Dungeons & Dragons. And thank you. I have a 4th edition campaign I'm DMing right now, set in my home setting of Oberon that I have been using since 1st edition.
I'm Rodney Thompson. I am an advanced designer on Dungeons & Dragons. I'm also the co-designer of the Lords of Waterdeep board game, co-designer of Dungeon Command, and my DM cred is similar. I have a 4th edition Forgotten Realms campaign that I have run on Monday nights, load these many years.
So we hope that this seminar will be informative, if not entertaining, and if it is neither, feel free to walk out at any time. But to get things underway, I'd like to ask the first question of my panelists, which is, what, in your mind, is one thing that makes a great DM?
So the ability to improvise. We got these questions before, so I'm not answering just super fast because I'm clever. I thought about this. No, I think it's the ability to improvise, because D&D is all about chaos, and who knows what the players are going to try to do. So if you're going to do one thing as a DM, there's one skill you can try to have. It's the ability to improvise under pressure. And really, in a lot of cases, it's not always easy to do.
No.
So having the ability to sort of stall for time would be the second thing that you could have. If you can't improvise, then at least keep them waiting. Usually that's a good time to maybe get dinner.
Lots of pee breaks.
Yeah,
Yeah.
get a something to eat.
I gotta go.
So that's probably my two best things at the end could have.
All right.
The one I'll say is an add-on to that, and that's actually being a good listener, which might seem like a strange thing to say because DMs spend so much time talking at the game table. But so often, to improvise well, the DM needs to listen well. And I don't mean just listen with your ears, but also pay attention with their eyes to see what's making their players smile, what's making them laugh, what maybe occasionally makes them cry, and then improvise.
Jeremy knows a lot about this.
Yes. I do actually at least once a year have a session where I make my players cry. Because they're moved, not because I'm hurting them.
Mace. He sprays them with mace.
But yeah, a big part of being able to improvise well is just having a lot of awareness at the table.
I would say one of the biggest things that a good DM can have is patience, both with their players, because we all know players can sometimes be trying and difficult, but also with themselves. Just as we've talked about improvising being a really big part of dungeon mastering, when you do run into something that you can't handle, remember to take a step back to keep calm and keep DMing.
If I were to answer my own question, I'd say one of the qualities of a great DM is really good players in the group. If you got players in your group who are acting like a bunch of ass clowns, it doesn't make one bit of difference how good of a DM you are. The story's not going to be very satisfying for anybody. So Jeremy, you had a question.
Well, my question is related to the answer you just gave. And so my question to the three of you is, when you're the DM, what makes a great player?
I like players that get engaged with the game world and that like to be active in the design of the world and the design of the campaign. I like it when my players say, hey, I want to be a part of a secret society, or hey, I want to lead an army, or give me some idea what creative things they're interested in doing, and then take that next step and be creative, right? Don't just tell me you're in a secret society. Tell me that you're in the Order of the Crimson Raven and they do X, Y, and Z.
And I imagine one way that a DM can encourage that kind of great player is making it clear to them that they too can improvise and help create the world.
Right, absolutely.
I would say one thing that makes a great player is the ability to pay attention. When you read box text from an adventure or you're describing a room, you say, you walk into a 10-foot high chamber full of bones. And the first question somebody around the table asks, so how high is the chamber?
Yep.
Wait, can you repeat that?
Rodney's the worst offender.
I am.
But also, I like players who can remember the thousands upon thousands of NPC names that I throw in their
Oh my
direction.
God, he is not kidding.
Yeah.
Wow.
So,
Even if they just could remember the NPC that they're actually talking to, that would be great.
Well, and I will add in that Chris creates so many NPCs in our campaign that most of us will try our best to remember the sort of the big ticket NPCs, but there are lower tiers of NPCs where my running joke in his current campaign is if an NPC has dropped to one of those lower tiers and none of us can remember the NPC's name, my character always refers to the person as
XP.
Oh, no, it's oh, you're the cook.
Yes.
So we have so many cooks we have met.
Yes.
So I'd say for me as a DM, it's probably, I really like players who have a kind of a sense of lateral thinking. Like instead of just, here's the door, let's just go through it. Is there another path we can take? Being a little inventive in how players attack problems and taking a bigger picture view. Like if there's a haunted house, you don't just go into the front door, maybe you climb to the roof and try to, or get into the second floor, or just burn the haunted house down, right? I actually like that as a DM because to me that's more interesting. It's more fun as a DM to deal with that and roll with those weird punches.
Bunch of flaming ghosts running around. All right, well, Mike, you had a question.
Oh yeah, so my question was, what is the biggest challenge you face as a DM?
I don't know. I'm going to pass the buck to Jeremy.
Because you have no
No
challenges.
challenges, right.
I stumped you.
Ronnie, do you have a quick answer?
I mean,
Yes,
mine's
I
easy.
do.
My players keep dying.
You can't
so
bounce it back.
Right,
Yeah.
mine is Mike? No.
Yeah.
I think the biggest challenge I always face personally is remembering what I've said in a previous session. And I know that sounds ridiculous, but man, I love to run with things off the cuff. Like one of my players, if I see them reacting really well to something, I'll be like, oh yeah, and then the guy says, here, meet my brother Joe, right? And then 2 sessions later, they'll be like, hey, what was that guy's name? I'll be like, pee break. So yeah, the biggest challenge for me is remembering to actually write things down during the session when I get super engaged in dealing with my players.
Yeah, that is one of my challenges. I will not cop out, though, and just say that's my answer, too.
I might.
Yeah.
No, one of my challenges is because I insist, at least in my home game, on making everything up myself. I never run any published adventures anymore. It means I am constantly having to come up with the maps for everything, the names for everybody. And So one of the things I go to for the most help is ready-made maps. That's sort of like the one cheat I give myself is, please, anywhere, is there a map I can lift, either from an adventure or the plan of a real-world building that I'll use for some location in my campaign.
My biggest challenge is coming up with story ways to kind of make the characters grow during their campaign. So once I know who all the players are and who all their characters are, I spend a great deal of time thinking about what's each of the characters' arcs. What do the players want their characters to evolve into over the course of the session, and finding ways to pay that off. I sort of think of my campaign a lot like an ensemble television series. Like I'm the writer of a series and trying to find episodes or adventures that are going to key off of different characters, so that Jeremy's character, for instance, gets a moment in the spotlight. Rodney's character gets a moment in the spotlight. Finding those moments and finding interesting things for their characters to face that tie into their greater stories is an ongoing challenge for me.
I think my character is a little bit of a spotlight hog.
Yeah.
I love how matter-of-factly you agreed.
Rodney.
So my question for the panel is, what's the one piece of advice that you always want to give to a new DM? A new DM.
So for me, I would just say just do it. Like, it's so easy to worry about the rules
I was gonna say the same
and
thing.
keeping everything
Damn
straight.
you, I was going to say the same
That's
thing.
why I won initiative, right? I just jumped in there. They saw you all hesitate. Yeah, no, so I mean, really just, it's easy to get really bogged down and worry about all the details and getting everything absolutely mapped out. But most of the time, the player is going to do something unexpected anyway, so all the prep you do, like maybe 10% of it will actually come into play. So if you've thought about DMing and you think it seems intimidating, it's just the best way to do is just start. Just run that first session and get it out of the way. So.
Yeah, as a DM, I remember making the mistake of like fully detailing out a town and detailing out the blacksmith and the mine near town and the innkeeper who had this cool story about being this ancient war hero who had basically settled down and all that. It was completely meaningless. The characters were gone from that town and never looked back 5 minutes after the campaign started. If they could have burned it to the ground, they would have.
I was going to ask if all that was left was a smoldering ruin. Right.
Yeah. And the dead innkeeper, his fist rising up out of the wreckage, saying, "But I had a story to tell."
My piece of advice would be trust what you love. And what I mean by that is it's really easy as a DM to second guess yourself and think, oh, I need to come up with this story in advance that's going to be totally creative and nobody's ever seen it before and tailored exactly to what my players want. Your best starting point is just what excites you? What do you love? What's the kind of fantasy story you want to tell? Be inspired by other fantasy stories or science fiction stories or any kind of story that you love and carry that passion into your DMing. And again, just trust your gut.
Well, I'll say my answer to my own question is don't hold anything back. If you have a good idea or an idea you think is good, if you have an idea for something exciting or fun that could happen in the next session, use it. Because you will always have more ideas, right? I used to do this all the time where I'd say, I'm going to have this awesome fight with a treant, and he's going to have a laser gun or whatever. And it sounded better in my head. And I would say, but that will be a great thing for 2 sessions from now. And then, of course, the next session, the game explodes, and my players leave, and we never get to that, right? You will always have more good ideas. So when you come up with something, don't save it. Don't hold it back. Always put your best ideas out there, because that's what's going to keep the momentum going in your campaign.
That's a really good idea. Whenever I do the PAX games with the guys from Penny Arcade, I just generally assume that it's always going to be the last one.
That's right.
And so I try to throw everything I can into that session, knowing we might never do it again, because I might get hit by a bus.
Yeah, when I was a much younger DM, I would constantly dream up these amazing banner encounters and these set pieces that will blow people's minds. And as Rodney says, often the campaign would never even get there. And so the whole thing was about getting to this destination that we never arrived at. And so now I followed the advice that Rodney just gave. in every session. I treat it as if we might never have another session. So, the thing that's exciting me now is the thing I'm putting into this session.
Cool. Well, we've all had a chance to ask our own questions. This is an hour-long seminar, and we'd like to offer you the chance, some of you, to come up and ask some questions of us related to DMing in particular. If you have other questions, try to grab us after the seminar is over.
And we also have other panels we're doing at the convention.
Check.
You're on.
In situations where conflict between player characters is boiling over, what's the best tips you had for keeping story continuity? They'll resolve it, they'll kill each other or whatever, but I'd like to keep the story going. They'll make new characters,
We
right?
are talking about player characters as opposed to players, right?
Absolutely. That'd be a different panel.
All right.
That's actually something that comes up in Chris's game. I play on Wednesday nights, and at various points, I'm not sure Chris has pushed me into conflict with other player characters.
yes.
Yeah. Yes, he has.
In
right.
fact, I've probably pushed Rodney's character harder than anybody else. I set up huge conflicts with him and other party members.
Right, but I think the thing that makes it work is, A, make sure the players know that at the end of the day, this conflict needs to be resolved in a way that keeps the campaign going, right? One of the things we often talk about when we talk about DMing is that there are players who will say things like, well, this is what my character would do. It's okay to have that conversation with your players and say, do what your character would do in such a way that the campaign can actually keep going after that, because there's role-playing your character and then there's being disruptive, right? So I think just, first of all, making sure that you've set up that relationship between your players and yourself is really, really important.
And also, I think just sort of foreshadowing it helps too, because then the players kind of feel like they're building toward it. To take the case of Rodney, he's playing a character who's a devotee of the Raven Queen, the Queen of Death. And in my campaign, Warforged are actually fueled by necrotic energy, not life energy. And so she has charged him, her eternal champion, with basically wiping the Warforged out. The problem is another of the player characters is a Warforged. And what does that actually mean? That's been sort of building up or brewing up to the point when she actually came forward and said, hey, Vargas, get off your ass and kill the Warforged.
Yeah.
And now he's got to wrestle that issue. That's unresolved at this point.
Right.
But I think the players understand that this is all part of the story, and regardless of how it ends up, it's not player versus player, it's whatever. By the same token, in the same group, Kurt Gould, another player of mine who played until recently Xantham the Gnome Bard, he got thrown for a loop out of nowhere and got thrown into hell, spent a lot of time there, came back, realized very little time had passed in the world at large, but the party didn't want him around anymore, and they threw him off their ship. And so
You make it sound so harsh.
you threw him off the ship.
He was a gnome bard. I mean,
He couldn't.
Hey, be nice to the gnomes.
I am nice to gnomes.
He couldn't even
Bards.
swim.
No, I'm kidding.
So that one sort of came out of the blue. That was one that wasn't very well foreshadowed, and consequently, it actually caused a sort of a minor disruption in the campaign, because at that point, Kurt decided that he was going to go back and play one of his older retired characters rather than bring Xantham back. But obviously, Kurt wanted to stay in the game, so that was the solution that worked for him. And as far as I know, they have no intention of throwing his current character.
No, we like his other character.
Yeah, because he's not a gnome bard.
Thank you.
Yep.
And when the conflict is generated by the players rather than something, rather than a seed that the DM has planted, because Chris definitely does plant these seeds, this is where improvisation becomes so important. For the DM to be able to roll with it, and with any bit of adversity at the game table, whether it's inter-party conflict or some unexpected course of action that the party takes. What I always try to do is see it as a new storytelling opportunity, rather than, oh my God, what my plans are being thwarted. Instead, it's like, no, here's this awesome, crazy thing I can now do, because they're being idiots, or whatever it is.
Cool.
Hi.
Hi.
You guys are like celebrities. I actually don't have a question. I just want to give you guys a quick thank you. I think I've watched online or attended every Ask the Dungeon Master panel there's been. I read you guys' blogs. I'm a big fan of stealing stuff from your world, Chris. My party's in EO Galaroth right now.
Wow.
Wow.
Sweet.
But I wanted to just share a quick text message that one of my players sent me, not knowing that how much of all of you guys' stuff I read and how much I steal from you. So really, I think you guys deserve this credit. What he said is, I know you're going to a place where everyone cares about the things that we care about, so you can feel free to share this. My DM is the best DM, hands down, and I will murder fuck anyone who tries to argue.
Wow.
So thank you very much for all the ideas you guys have given me and all the tips over the years and everything and all the panels. It's been great.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
So when I play at D&D now, I look around the table and I see a lot of iPads, cell phones, laptops. Are there any software tools that you guys use yourselves or would recommend are definitely worth a look at, things like that, for helping the DM, sort of keep track of notes, for instance, or keep track of maybe the 10,000 status effects that happen sometimes? Anything that you guys would recommend in that area?
I now do all of my DMing with an iPad. And I have my campaign notes in it. I create all my encounters in advance using Apple's spreadsheet program Numbers. That's also how I track initiative because I can quickly reorder things. So yeah, my iPad has become my little DMing companion.
Yeah, I also use my iPad. There's an initiative tracker out there called, I think it's just called Initiative, right? That I use. It's really simple to use. I have a database program that I use to track world lore. Sometimes I will set up slideshows in advance with images. If I know the players are going to encounter NPCs, just load the images on my iPad and say, and you now see this guy, right? And that's a good way to do the sort of pseudo handout. I think that's most of what I use.
I'm the opposite. I'm very old school. I don't have a Facebook account. I don't have a Twitter account. I don't use my iPad. I don't bring a computer to the table. I just keep everything trapped in my robot-like brain.
Yes, I don't have a mechanical brain, but I have Dropbox. So I just use Dropbox for everything. And so even if I'm at work, if I just see an image I like, I just put it in my Dropbox. I just have a folder that just gets filled with stuff. And so either it's campaign notes, so after a session, I can just, if I have a few free minutes at work, I just can go through them. But even just keeping things in there for just ideas like maps I see online, if someone on a blog posts a map or anything, or just a photo of a cool looking vista or something like that, I just drop it all in my Dropbox. When it's time to plan, at least, like all those random collected thoughts are in one spot. I can just go through. So
Thanks.
I actually run a game that has 7 players.
There's some
So
sympathy.
obviously with 4th edition, combat can take a long time, and there's also a lot of time in between each person's turns. So a lot of what I see is Twittering, Facebooking, using their cell phones and stuff, which I'm fine with. They usually also get up and sit on the couch. But it's gotten to the point where a couple of my players last session started playing Magic in between turns. So my question to you is,
We heartily endorse their Magic playing behavior.
My question is, how can you engage the players when it's not their turn and you're also trying to adjudicate other people's turns?
One thing I do, on one hand, I just accept that a certain amount of that is going to happen. And that's been true, ever since I've been DMing, going all the way back to 1st edition. People will get up, they'll go get, a drink from the fridge, they'll, play, more recently play a game on their phone or something. But one of the things I do is I try to keep the story going throughout a battle. Yeah. So almost always, and this is something Chris definitely does as well in his DMing, is I just keep the description coming the whole time. The NPCs always have things to say. There's always some cool thing to describe in the environment. There's always some shift that's occurring. I don't assume that once I've set an encounter up that it's basically sort of a clock I wound up and it's just going to play itself out. I keep performing the whole time. And that usually succeeds in keeping people engaged.
Yeah, I was going to say too. One thing I've heard other people do this with 4E, and it's something I think is pretty useful. If people have their action chosen before their turn, like as soon as their turn comes up, they know exactly what they're going to do. You should give them like a +2 bonus or something like that. So at least it might not solve for everything, but it encourages people to at least be ready, and that kind of maybe helps things move along. And it does reward you for paying attention because then you know what's happening. You're not just going to fireball those kobolds. Oh no, they just died on Bob's turn or something like that. No, so it does reward you for at least keeping tabs on what's going on.
If it's a case of a player being indecisive, like they're just taking a long time to figure out what they want to do, I'll skip them and go to the next person, and just once they figure out what they're going to do, they can jump back into the initiative order. I don't wait for them, basically. Got to keep it moving. Yeah.
All right, thanks.
Hey guys.
Hello.
Actually, little tip on, since you use your iPads in games, I've got a note-taking app that to help me remember. I actually record all of my games, and then I take notes afterwards.
I've thought about
But-
doing that, but I'm afraid that my iPad will burst into flames.
Yeah,
If I do that
yeah. Sometimes you have
with
to go
some of
back
my
and
players.
yeah. Sometimes you have to go back and censor. But
Right.
I actually, she kind of touched on one of my questions. Most of my players, we work a ton, so we very rarely get together. So two of the things that I struggle with are, for one, prepping with short amount of time whenever we find a weekend that we can actually game. You know, I've got story out to forever, but actually getting ready for the game. So any tips that you have there? And then also when we get together, it's like we haven't seen each other for a while. So how do you guys manage keeping on task and moving the game forward, even though everybody is, you know, having fun talking to each other? Because you don't want to stop that, but you also want to make sure you get somewhere meaningful in the game.
At the start of a game session, as soon as I feel I'm ready to begin, I'll just force all the conversations to come to a stop by saying, previously in Iamandra, and then recapping previous session's work. Everybody just sort of goes, oh, they're in the game now. And it all just sort of stops dead.
It has a nice ritualized feel to it, especially because,
Yeah.
I mean, this is now the second campaign of Chris's I've played in, and I know when he says, previously in the block campaign, that's time to stop talking.
Yeah, and it's a technique I use in my home game as well. And because, I mean, with Chris's game, we play at the office, so we don't have audio equipment where we play. But at home, I not only do the sudden, you know, the visual, I mean, not the verbal cue that it's time to start, but I also have a piece of music I always play when it's now the game is starting.
Yeah,
And so it's sort of the theme song.
And
Yeah.
if you go a while between games, it also, I mean, one thing I try to do is have it, the first scene of that adventure you're going to play is like a really important, either it's a cliffhanger that's being resolved, or there's a really important like just choice that has to be made. Because I found if the players start talking socially, but they start talking about the game, then it's an easier segue, because people know, you know, what are we going to do about this X or Y, or is someone going to live or die, or something like that. I mean, so if you can kind of plan it ahead, you can sort of tell the players, like, here's almost like get that preamble done on email or something like that, so they know coming in you're going straight into something really important.
As far as prep time stuff, I find, cover your ears. That I don't have to do much prep at all. I just kind of wing it. But they think I spend hours and hours and hours actually planning all this shit out.
No, and I actually wing it a ton too. I mean, I find the most valuable prep is getting your elements ready, like a list of names,
Yeah.
some locations, a few useful maps. Make sure you actually have your own plot straight in your head. And as long as you have those key pieces ready, you can pretty much do anything.
What I typically do to prepare, and this is exactly what Jeremy's describing, is I'll make a one sheet for myself. That's basically, here's the name of the adventure at the top. Here's a list of NPCs, organized in some sort of priority order from most important to least important, or however I want to do that. Very much like a cast scroll at the start of a television series or something like that, with like a one-line description of who they are, just as a reminder to me, so that when I put this sheet in my log later on, it doesn't get, I can remember all the details. And then underneath that cast list, basically, is a bullet point list of events, what I assume is going to happen in a session. Now, often that's about 50% inaccurate. As the session plays out, it goes off in weird directions, but at least in my head, I've thought about one possible way in which this is actually going to play out.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Hey guys.
Hello.
Hi.
I periodically run one-shot game nights for both to introduce new people to the game and to kind of interview people for my ongoing sessions. So I was wondering if you have any advice on both how to make the game as exciting as possible for those brand new people, and for my benefit to see, which players are going to be the best for my ongoing campaigns.
Well, I think for brand new people, it's easy to overcomplicate it. Like if they haven't played D&D before, even just like simple things, just the idea of, hey, you can try anything. I think that'd be an important thing to bring up, is give them really open, like it's easy to think for beginners, you want to give them something very linear, but I think the opposite's actually true. Like in my experience, new players are the ones who are the most open to just trying anything, that, kind of testing the bounds of the game. And in some ways, kind of giving them something that is, has a really, the one thing they probably need is clear direction. Because you have, on one hand, you can do anything, but on the other, well, why are you doing what you want to do? So I usually like to run, for new players, sessions or adventures that have a clear goal, like here's something that's going on that you need to resolve in some way, but give them a lot of options for how to do it, rather than a very, say, linear dungeon. Or something that's very ambling, like, hey, you're in a dungeon, what do you want to do, right? So the players kind of know, hey, we have a goal, here's what we're supposed to do. And I think it's also important in the setup is to give them a reason to care about that goal. Whether it's just, you're going to visit your mentor and, hey, he's been kidnapped or he's been killed and here's the guy who did it, or something like that. So the players, they're not trying to figure out what they're supposed to do. They're more focused on how are we going to do what we're supposed to do. Because I think players, if they're new to D&D, are used to the idea of games having goals, right? If you play Mass Effect, you know what you're supposed to do, or any other RPGs. So I think kind of trading on those two things is key. And kind of challenge them to be creative and have a good time, rather than kind of feel you have to really lead them by the hand from point A to point B.
Yeah, there are two things that I do very quickly. One is I don't start off by describing the rules in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
I just throw them right into the story, and the rules will come up as the story progresses, and I can deal with them on a case-by-case basis. Then the other thing I do is I spend a lot more time articulating some of the more visual elements of a battle, say, like how this guy is swinging his sword around and what he's saying and doing as the sword is hitting, and what the effect of the sword hitting the shield actually does. The shield splinters, all these little fine details that aren't represented in the rules at all, but just add color to the combat and the situation.
And as far as sort of spotting potential players in a situation like that, this goes back to something I was saying earlier about just listen well, watch, see who's engaged, see who is funny without being disruptive, see who's being a mini storyteller with you as the DM, because I know as a DM, I love it when players sort of join me in telling the story. They take a detail in their character's background or in the environment, and they just run with it. They start describing things. So I just listen carefully, watch their behavior. If a person's a rules lawyer, there's no chance they're going to make it to my table.
That's why you kicked me out. The one thing I will say is remember that you are the window through which the players look into your world. So all of your descriptions are extremely important, but it's also good to communicate to them. Mike said make sure they have lots of options. To communicate very clearly that they are options, right? If you think that they can solve a problem by going and talking to the blacksmith or the butcher or the carpenter, make sure that when you communicate to the players that there are those three professions, that there's something about them that draws the players towards them as a means of getting them through that plot. It's just, it can't be, I can't reinforce enough that with your descriptions, you're painting a picture of your world, so it's really important to pay attention to what you're telling them.
All right, thank you guys.
You're welcome.
Hi.
Hello.
My evil campaign needs your help. My party is awesome. They have formed a nice cohesive unit. They are well on their way down the story to world domination. They're not having enough evil fun. They're being incredibly smart, and we're having some great interactions with all these NPCs. They've managed to talk enemies into joining their cause, which is kind of evil, but I have a few more bloodthirsty members of my group who would love to do things like slaughter the puppy that I put out for them, but they then manage to convince the guy to join them and the puppy doesn't get slaughtered. So I feel like maybe I'm just not coming up with smart enough ways for them to be evil. And it sounds...
You've got this is like some sort of bizarro D&D campaign.
All the people that they fought have been well-armored militia people who can defend themselves, and when I give them opportunities to slaughter the innocent, they want to do smarter things. So how do I come up with a more subtle way of being evil when they won't even slaughter a puppy?
Well, in some ways, the most evil thing that they could do would be to subjugate the people around them and convince the people to follow them. I mean, basically become very clever tyrants. So if the road of slaughter is not the road they want to go down, then encourage that pursuit of domination.
Yeah, are the players having fun? Are they enjoying the campaign?
They are. I just have a couple. The fighters want to fight things, and they're having fun with the negotiations. And it certainly is all, as I said, on the way to world domination. But when they're itching to slaughter the town people around them, and everybody else is going, no, 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 because then we can't buy the things that we need, and we can't get the information we need. And I want to reward them for being smart and intelligent and crafty, but I'd like the guys to be able to slaughter things every once in a while and be overtly evil.
Well, there are good monsters they could be fighting. They could be fighting, a gold dragon or a silver dragon. Have them fight some treants.
So, an easy way actually, so if you want to if they talk some of these townsfolk into being their friends, have them revolt, because it's like, hey, if we just killed these guys, this wouldn't have been a problem. So something like that, where it's just, it sounds like maybe also if the player's really convinced that this is always going to work, that you can kind of go back and revisit some of their older decisions. And this is kind of where I like to mess with players. Like, they think something's solved, but it's actually a glaring problem that's growing, and it kind of gives them a chance to go back and revisit, a choice they made or something that happened. Right? It's like, oh, you spared these guys. Well, these guys are actually forming the Freedom Fighter Alliance behind your backs. It's going to come back and try to take you guys down or something like that.
You could also introduce the idea of an adventurers guild in your world that sees your adventurers as a problem, both in terms of PR and in terms of adventurers can't go into a town anymore because they're thinking about this party who's just ransacked everything in sight. Having this adventurers guild be sort of the party's nemesis, and occasionally when the fighter's getting bored, a group of these adventurers suddenly become visible in a room, because they're probably invisible to begin with, and start attacking them out of the blue. That could be an interesting, ongoing, and odd campaign villain.
Yeah, and I think that especially with villains, right? One of the most common ways you see villains engage in sort of wholesale slaughter is where they need to make an example out of somebody, right? I think the idea of the rebellion or what have you is a great example of, actually killing these guys is the right solution, right? In Star Wars, they blew up Alderaan to make a point, basically. Right?
Thank you.
Yeah.
That was a great question and very hard to top.
Yeah.
Sir, you're up.
Man, I want her problem.
Good luck.
Comment I thought of while I was in line in reference to the thread earlier about electronics. I use a wiki to track all of my stuff, which works really well because then you can kind of have links, deep information about things.
Right.
But anyway, so my question was, I tend to focus really heavily on the RP side of things and less on the mechanics. And I have this tendency to sort of bend the rules. I have some house rules that
Good
I
for you.
state explicitly.
Awesome.
You're doing it right.
Yeah.
That's cool.
But yeah, so my question is, if you guys do that too, and if that's encouraged, how do you balance bending the rules to tell a good story versus having the players have a stable system that they can rely on so that they know what they can do and that things will work when they expect them to work?
Yeah, for me it comes down to what kind of rules you're changing. And I try not to house rule things that show up in a character sheet. Like if I'm going to change things, it's more likely to be access based. Like in this campaign there aren't any sorcerers, or in this campaign paladins are all hunted by this bad guy or something like that. So players know when they make their characters if there's any restrictions, or just things like whatever certain powers I just don't want people using in the campaign, whatever. The trick is, for this in my experience, is if you're going to bend the rules, you can either be very obvious about it, so the players know this rule's been changed, it's a house rule. And then the other way to do it, in some ways it's the old DM trick of, you roll the die behind the screen and then you have the other die that's cocked right to the result that you want to show the players, and so they kind of don't know you're bending the rules. Because it is tempting sometimes, it also depends on the kind of players you have, right? Like some players, especially the rules lawyers, they want the rules to work the way they are. And I suspect you have rules lawyers in your group.
I have a mix. I have some newer players that I'm trying to get to, do things and think about all the possibilities. But then I do have older players who, have been playing for a really long time. They've been playing since second, I think, some of them. And so they're expecting the rules to work the way the rules work in the book. Yeah.
Yeah.
I would say just also make sure that when you bend both ways. Remember that your players are engaged in that story just as much as you are, and so if you're bending the rules to their detriment all the time, of course they're going to react negatively to that. If you bend the rules in their favor occasionally, that sort of softens it a little bit, so that it makes it very clear to your players that you're bending the rules to tell a story, but it's their story that you're telling. Because I mean, that's really what you do when you DM is you help them tell their story, right? And so bending in their favor lets them know that you're doing this all in good faith.
Yeah.
Yeah, as long as they know you're not their adversary.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, my guideline is I never mess with something that could invalidate a player's choice, and that includes not messing with things on their character sheet. But I will mess with things at will if it's going to make a better story. But that means I'm usually messing with things that players don't have access to, like the abilities that a monster might have. You know, I frequently will have my players meet some hag who is doing some stuff that is in no stat block. You know, she's summoning up strange fey creatures and turning the entire area into a swamp. You know, this is not written anywhere. It's just I decided, oh, this is going to make this encounter even more awesome.
And yeah, so that's part of my problem is that some of the people I play with were DMs, and so they know that sort of stuff. They're like, that's not an ability. You can't make that an ability.
That's your purview as DM, so that's completely different, right? If you're having the monster do something, I mean, if you're having it do it with players like, I cast Fireball, and like, well, this ice elemental is immune to fire, right? That's one thing, right? Because you're just trying to counter what the players are doing. But if it's examples like Jeremy just gave, that's part of being a DM is coming up with those things.
Possibly just tell the players deal with it.
Well, yeah, just say, in my world, this is how it works. And the thing is, it's not, I mean, that's, especially if that's kind of how you planned it out, I mean, that's your right as the DM. It's not, it's sort of like kind of argue with a novelist, like, you can't, this guy can't do this because of that. And like, well, you can, I mean, if there's obviously the case the players can just leave, but I mean, if they're really that offended by it, but players shouldn't be trying to DM for you. I mean, that's always kind of my attitude toward it, that you're there creating like the setting and the world for them to enjoy. If they kind of want to start poking in the firmament behind it, and that's kind of, to me, that's kind of crossing a line. The player shouldn't be going.
If I'm changing rules, I always think, well, at some point the player should be able to turn this against me.
Yep.
And if I'm cool with that, then it's good.
Yeah. One trick, real quick, that you can use if you have people who are very familiar with, say, monster stat blocks. And this is a trick I use all the time because a number of my players work with us on the game. So they, like us, they know the game inside and out. I make sure that when I'm DMing, say with a monster, I will only use the monster's printed name if I'm going to run the monster by the book. If any time I am customizing the monster in any way, I never refer to it by its printed name. So nobody sort of goes down this path of thinking, oh, I know what this type of star spawn does. Like, no, I will give it a unique name. You know, nobody knows what Auntie Rottooth does. Only I do, because I'm making it up right now. And if I never, say this is a night hag, a lot of those problems vanish.
Yeah, because I think that usually comes down to players' expectations. If you say, hey, you're fighting a troll, and the players think, well, you should use fire. And you're like, oh, this is actually it's a orange skin flame troll. It gets stronger with fire, right? And then you're not really playing fair.
Right.
I think it's having that balance between those two.
Well, thanks. Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hey, what's up? I run a 4th edition Dark Sun campaign. I know, Rodney, like you print a lot of material on that.
Yes,
and I totally use as much as I can.
Cool.
So, and one of my favorite things to do, like as I DM, is to split the party and get them to go on their different ways. Except most recently, the party split, it's kind of hard to put them both back together. So basically, just to run down the plot, I'm running like a giant arena tournament, a coliseum in Tyr, and half the people are now like in the final matches and the great, ziggurat and all that, and half the party didn't make it, and they're doing off their own thing. But the problem is, what's the best way you would go about handling both of these two subplots together so that everyone remains engaged and I don't have to I have a separate section for one plot and a separate section for the other?
One thing I would say is try and bring them back together. I mean,
I realized that it was a little harder than usual to do it
Sure.
this time, but
It's okay to be contrived occasionally too, right? I mean, like, it's like, oh, and suddenly, because you're following this plot thread over here, you find the thing that allows you to go fight in the arena again, right? I mean, that's okay, actually.
well, that was the thing because the party members that didn't make it didn't want to keep fighting. They didn't want to go back to the arena. It's like they wanted
That's
to go
fair.
down this other path.
And I have nothing for you.
I expected more from you.
What I like to do is just to find some way for the other group to like have an obvious reason to go handle the other. Like some monkey wrench comes up. So if you have party A and party B,
Yeah.
party A is somehow being recruited or somehow being exposed to something that's going to monkey wrench party B. So in your example, maybe some mysterious stranger approaches these characters who aren't in the tournament and says, "Hey, we know you guys are gladiators. We want to hire you to infiltrate the tournament and sabotage party B," with maybe the guy not knowing that they're aligned, or they overhear someone making these plans. So you kind of give the players an organic input, maybe interesting reason for them to get together, right? That there's some plot thread that's going to have them cross. The group that's not fighting, maybe you're going to give them their own story to resolve, like something interesting for them to do. It's not just, hey, you're going to go watch the arena fight. And that might be kind of, I found that happen sometimes when you split the party. If one group's having a more interesting story and the other group just kind of is drifting, they kind of give them a real clear goal that's also going to have them collide.
I think they both have something like really,
okay.
like very high stakes for both of them. The problem is trying to keep the story moving, so I have tried to give as much attention as I can to both sides.
Got it.
I think that's more or less the issue I'm having.
One of the things I will often do in my games is actually run both scenes simultaneously. That is, basically put everybody into an initiative order. And when it comes up to the turn of somebody who's in Group A, we're in the Coliseum. When it's somebody's turn and they're in Group B, we're out in the streets, killing somebody. And I will jump back and forth with a little bit of narrative every time we skip to a new place.
And I think it's totally okay to do that, even if both groups aren't in combat.
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah. And we have 5 minutes.
I've been DMing for a few years now, but I also work, so I'm fairly busy. But I still, want to learn to be a better DM, but at the same time, I don't have a whole lot of time to spend on actually working out how to do that. But I do, maybe have a couple hours on a weekend to read stuff, or, while I'm waiting for code to compile or something like that. So are there any resources you could recommend that I, what 1 or 2 things would you recommend I have a look at in the time I've got?
Read Chris's column.
Yeah.
His column has a lot of great advice in it. Also, the 4th edition Dungeon Master's Guide is filled with great advice that is actually edition neutral. No matter what edition of D&D you're DMing, or really, a lot of the advice is applicable to any role-playing game, and there's just a lot of great advice there for running the game at the table, preparing for your game, analyzing what your players like, and so on and so on.
Yeah, and assuming that you have internet access when you have this downtime, I mean, you said you're compiling code, so I assume so. Occasionally I'll go and find like YouTube videos that are about improv acting and watch those. Just basically, improv tips from professional actors.
Yeah. There's also a lot of blogs out there on DMing. If you go to rpgbloggers.com, it just aggregates a bunch of feeds. And I found, like, not all those blogs are necessarily about DMing, but you may find a couple, and then it starts to network off from their blog, their lists, whatever feeds, and then you start finding more and more blogs. Gnomestew.com is another good place to start. They have a lot of DMing advice articles there.
I collect adventures, so I spend a lot of my off time just reading old adventures. Not necessarily always D&D either, because sometimes I can get as much inspiration from a Call of Cthulhu adventure as I do from a dungeon magazine.
Yeah. Actually, I'd say that's even better sometimes, because it gets you to think in different ways. Instead of having a very D&D mindset, where you might be thinking about the dungeon or the encounters, reading adventures for other systems can maybe help you think more like a Pendragon, adventure, which is sort of Arthurian fantasy, might really inspire a different way to approach an adventure.
And there's a slightly less chance my players will have ever seen or heard of it.
Yeah.
But only slightly.
Okay, thank you very much. That's helpful.
Hi, I was wondering how you as a panel come down on the idea of player death versus story. Like if you were...
He means character death.
We just put him in the basement.
Mike's basement.
Like if maybe the roles just go, they're right about to meet maybe the mastermind that they've been working towards, and a bunch of like the henchmen really just sock it to them and they're all wiped out. Do you let the dice roll and sort of show a humanizing lesson, or do you maybe make a story spin-off so they all survive, or just sort of fudge the numbers? What do you like?
I typically let the dice fall where they may, and if it's like a TPK, which has happened on occasion, often I'll sort of, or even if it's not, even if it's just a single character, I always put the ball back in the player's court and ask them, what do they want to do? Do they like playing the character they have now, and do they want that story to continue, or is this an opportunity for them to try something new? Maybe they're actually chomping at the bit and they're secretly relieved that their half-elf bard or paladin is dead, because now they can play a character who's actually liked by the party.
The other thing I'd throw out there too is if it's near the end of the campaign, and you can always just fast forward like 10, 20 years, like Evil's won, what's going to happen next? Because that also means like some of those NPCs the characters may have, like the players have been exposed to, become really great villains for your next campaign. And it's personal this time. It's not just.
Because often your biggest blessings as a DM are going to be the things you didn't foresee. Because if rather than fighting against them, if you embrace them, you'll have all sorts of great twists.
Thank you very much.
So I love playing, I love DMing, but ever since I started making games, my free time has just kind of been vaporized. And I find these days whenever I've tried to actually DM, I just burn out very quickly. And I'm wondering if you have any tips for DMing on a very tight time budget and like avoiding burnout in that situation.
So one of the things I used to do before I came to work at Wizards, I was a freelance game designer, and I wouldn't have much time. I had a campaign I ran, and then it kind of ended, and I was kind of in the same situation. I made just a bunch of like 4th level characters, and I would run these very specific, very weird adventures just as one-offs. Things like, you're all the chaotic evil minions of some super powerful evil guy who sent you to kill this kitten, kind of like the earlier DM. So it could be something really distinct, but I also found having it very focused meant we'd play for 2 or 3 hours and then be done, and it kind of let me either focus on something that's fun and complete, so it's not like, okay, we were in middle finish, and it kind of let me really test out lots of different stuff, and kind of try to get back to where I wanted to be as far as DMing, or, the players knew showing up that we're going to have something very focused and quick. So I still have a full bunch of 3-5 characters at 4th level, and that was just, so no character generation, just throw the character sheets on the table, people would pick them up, and we'd just start playing. So.
Oh, we're at time. We're at time. I'm sorry.
Yeah, just like we don't have much time to prep.
We have to call this here, but thank you everyone for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you for playing. Thank you for dungeon mastering. There are never enough dungeon masters in the world, so
thank you.
Thank you.
Have dungeon master babies.
Yes, thank you.
Not now.
Later.
We have a little bit of space at the hallway right by the inn. If you guys wanted to get back.
Oh, okay. Out in the hall, you mean? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we're gonna try to